Next up, it's Korea Book Club, our weekly segment exploring the world of Korean literature, usually through works available in translation and beyond. And for that, so we are joined by our literary critic, Barry Welsh, as ever. Barry, hello, it's great to see you.
Yes, good evening.
Okay, so what are you introducing to our listeners today?
So today we're reviewing a short story called Tungsin-bul by Kim Tong-ni and translated by Sol Sun-bong. And it was initially published back in 1961 in Korea. The English translation has been published at least twice. So first it was published in 2002 in the Portable Library of Korean Literature, and then again in 2015 as part of the Modern Korean Literature series. So it's quite a notable story. It's from a very prominent writer who had a fascinating life. So Kim Tong-ni was born in Yeongju in 1913. He was born into a very impoverished family, and he'd later write that hunger was his constant companion during his youth. He was constantly hungry. His elder brother, Kim Tong-bul, was actually a celebrated intellectual who influenced the younger Kim's life. But I guess he's been sort of surpassed in the public consciousness by his brother now. And Kim started writing poetry at a very young age. He was published by the time he was 16, and this was the beginning of a long career devoted to literature. He won a string of awards. He worked as a professor of literature and creative writing. He was married a few times to other writers, and he led a life generally full of incident until his death in 1995. And he was interested in lots of things, but people often talk about his work in relation to the role of myths, traditions and religions in the lives of Koreans during the 20th century. And that's something we can see in today's story, which is about the impact of Buddhism on a young man in the mid-20th century.
Okay, so it's interesting because Buddhism is still very influential in Korean society today, of course, with lots of Koreans identifying as practicing Buddhists. There are many Buddhist temples scattered across the country and an abundance of different orders of Buddhist monks as well. It's not uncommon for busy working people to go to Buddhist temples for a few days as well to escape the hectic pace of modern Korean society. So it's interesting to see how it might contrast or not contrast so much in Kim's time. Can you tell us more then? How does Kim talk about the role of Buddhism in Korean life?
Right, yeah. So this story has an immediately engaging premise. It starts with a young Korean soldier telling us he was a student at a university in Japan when in 1943 he was drafted into the Japanese army. He's now 22 years old. He's stationed in Nanking, and this is not an uncommon story. So many young Korean men at this time were forcibly drafted into the Japanese army. They were forced to fight, and of course, sadly, many of these young men died fighting a war they didn't want to be in. And we've read other stories which touch on that aspect of the war as well. But the young soldier in this story is sure that death is approaching. His garrison knows that they will soon be sent into combat, and like those that have already been sent before, they will likely not return. And he says, most of us harboured a wish that we be detained in Nanking as long as possible because it meant keeping ourselves alive that much longer. So he devises a strategy to escape, but how will he escape?
Right, so when we say Nanking, we mean Nanking in China, and it is romanized as Nanjing now, I believe, and it's
right.
Also understand the same Nanjing as in the Nanjing massacre, the terrible war crime and atrocity committed by Japanese soldiers during the Second World War period. It took place a few years before when this story takes place, though. So it is unrelated, but I guess it adds another layer of eeriness to the story as well. Anyway, going back to the soldier, it is, of course, a difficult situation. Deserters from the army were executed, so this young man is caught between a rock and a hard place, either go into battle where he will almost certainly be killed or try and escape, and if caught, then face execution. So Barry, what does he do then?
Right, so he learns through some deception that there's a Buddhist monk in Nanking, and in desperation he plans to present himself to this monk and ask to join his Buddhist order. So one evening he manages to sneak away from his camp. He goes down into the town and introduces himself to this man. He locates him and introduces himself. He's full of doubt. After all, he's an enemy soldier. He's a Korean in the Japanese army. So why should this Chinese monk listen to him at all? But the monk does listen to him, and once he's heard his story, he makes this young man write a promise in blood. So he cuts his finger and he writes a promise in blood and says, "I wanted to be exempted from the offence of life-taking and to reside in the merciful world of Buddha forever." And having written this in blood, the monk agrees to help the young man escape and leads him, or has one of his monk colleagues to lead him into the mountains, through this sort of secret hidden path way up into the mountains, away from the Japanese army, and ultimately to a hidden Buddhist temple in the mountains, where he begins a new life as a monk. But having made this escape, he's very relieved, but as the days and weeks pass, he becomes increasingly disturbed by one of the Buddhist statues in this temple.
Okay, so what is it about this particular statue that disturbs the young man so much?
Right, yeah, so if you've ever visited a temple, one of the many Buddhist temples in Korea, you'll know that there's lots of statues, and like it is here, there's many statues of Buddha around this temple, but there's one particular statue that is kept hidden in a room, sort of in this closed room, and only visitors get to go there. Sometimes the visitors do come to the temple and they're given a special audience with the statue. What could be so special about it? His curiosity is ignited, and he asks one of the older monks to see it, and he's shocked by its appearance. He says it was not the usual image of dignity, holiness, and physical perfection. There was something about this Buddha that filled one with a nearly painful feeling of sympathy. It seemed to grimace suffering or pain. I began to feel something choking me. The feeling of shock changed into a feeling of fear. The statue has this massive impact on him. He feels terror that seems to reach into his very being, and we learn that this statue has a horrible and tragic history. The statue was once a man with an awful history who became a monk, and the other monks believe became invested with this sacred power. This monk ended his life through a ceremony called the Soshin Kongyang, meaning that he was saturated in oil for several days and he was set alight. And this self-immolation lasted for days, and as it lasted, several miracles seemed to happen at the same time. So the rain poured down, but it didn't seem to touch him, and there was various other, sort of mystical occurrences happened at the time when he was burning. And ever since then, monks and visitors have prayed to this immolated statue figure in the hope of experiencing some new miracles.
Wow, it's quite a powerful image, and it's quite a turn in the story as well.
Yeah.
What do you think then Kim is saying, perhaps about Buddhism or belief in general with the story?
Right, so I'm sure there are many symbols and images that I've not picked up on. I'm not a Buddhist literature scholar, and I'm sure there are many Buddhist experts who could explain the story and symbolism in more depth and detail. But nevertheless, it's certainly a story that non-scholars of Buddhism can enjoy. It is a sort of a strange story with an eerie kind of power. It's about sacrifice and suffering and the attainment of enlightenment. How do we reach enlightenment? What is it? What is the role of suffering in life? And how do we exist with our suffering? And these are very deep and heady questions. And at the end of the story, there's this very strange little episode at the end of the story. So one of the monks asks to see the finger the young man drew blood from to write his oath at the beginning of the story. And it's not really explained why he asks to see this. What is the significance of this or the symbolism of it? It doesn't spell out the answer for us, but it seems to be suggesting that this young man, this desperate young man who fled for his life in the middle of the night, and perhaps the reader, like this young man, we're all on our way to being this tragic statue of the burning monk, hidden in the temple. We are all on the path to enlightenment, but of course not there yet.
Sure. I think it would be interesting to see if there's any academic analysis of this text that can fully unpack the layers and perhaps some of the historical context as well, because I think it does sound fascinating. But today we're going to leave it there. Once again, the book is called Tungsin-bul by Kim Tong-ni, and that was our pick for Korea Book Club this week. Barry, thank you as always. Have a great week, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, take care.